Thank you. We're going to go ahead and get started. My name is... I'll wait, I don't mind. My name is Mark Dixon. I am here from Centers at JSU, and I am here to introduce these presenters. I won't introduce them one by one, but this session is using competencies to advance you and your department. So I will give it away. Don't forget on your app, if you can, pull it up on your guidebook to fill out your session monitor things. So,
thank you, sir. Hey, it's great to look out here and see a real blend of colleagues and at different stages of the career. So I'm Kathleen Hatch, and we hope we can have some fun with you today, even though we may be talking about something that's serious and a framework for us and our departments. But we've got a sample of material, and we do hope that we've got some good time for Q&A. This is being recorded. I just wanted you to know that. So we may get stuck to some mics to just make sure that we've got a good record of this for members to use after this session is over. So hopefully you had a chance to see specifically what we hope you can walk away from. And there's certainly some concrete sort of specialty areas that we're going to do a quick dive into. We think that it's obviously a part of a strategic mapping that you may look at for your own career or a whole area of interest. And we certainly think that we want to ignite some new skills in the context of what's our best practice. These are the areas that we want to touch on and make sure you walk away with understanding a little bit more relative to these competencies areas, as well as the topics of executive leadership and managing and leading professionals. So the very talented team that I get to now introduce is a good colleague at Mount Royal University, Chris Daw, who many of you know, Jackie Hamilton, spectacular colleague, also in the retired category, which we're having a lot of fun with, so it's not real retirement, it's just called Part 2. And then a terrific two teammates from North Dakota, Jen Pull-Winkler and Karina Whitman. So, Jackie.
Okay, we are going to talk a little bit about the history of the competencies. We're going to just give you some bullet points. Surprisingly, the competencies have been around since 2004. It was a research study that was done by Dr. Bob Barcelona and Craig Ross, and it was reported in a journal article. And then after that, NIRSA was really looking at developing a registry instead of, or to replace the old CRSS. And so the national headquarters contracted with Cheryl Wild, who did 2 reports. One was about professional registries and how those work, and then the second report had to do more specifically with the National Registry for Recreational Sports Professors. And then in 2009, those competencies were validated, and this was part of the Ohio University's joint project with the NIRSA National Headquarters, and that was the Research Institute. And once those were validated, the final touches were put on to launch the registry, and in 2011, that registry was launched. And how many among us are registry members, just for a quick take? Okay, that's wonderful. There is a very direct connection between the competencies and the registry. In 2012, there was an educational review task force that was created because there needed to be some more resources behind these 8 competencies. People didn't have a really deep understanding of what they were or how they could be used. And so then that was identified by this review team during the 2012 year that morphed into something called the Educational Task Force. There was a team of 8 across the country, and I'm going to give some quick shout outs because this was a lot of heavy lifting. Wallace Eddy, Mike Weinberger, Sarah Harden, Julie Wallace-Carr, and Dave D'Angelo and Jen Spear. That group worked together with me and then Sherry from, at the time, at the national office to develop these examples in each of the 8 areas and also the assessment tool. That was rolled out last year in 2015, and in 2016, This year, there are actually 3 presentations specifically on the competencies and how groups are using them, and we are really expecting that this will be a foundational resource for the membership. There are eight areas. I'm not going to read them. You can see that, short and sweet.
Just to refresh your memory.
Yes, just to refresh your memory. Okay, back to you guys then.
Okay. So next we're going to show you some ways that various campuses have been using the competencies. So this is just an example that we did at the University of North Dakota. And so what we did is we took the competencies document that's online and created a self-assessment tool. And so what we did was we listed the competencies, subcategories, and then the different levels within the subcategories and inputted them into an online survey platform. So it's kind of hard to see, but this is a student learning and development kind of subcategory, and then the different levels within each of them. So what this does is, or what the person doing the assessment will have to then pick which statement or group of statements best articulates kind of their experience or where they're at currently. And the way these are listed in the competency document are as beginner, intermediate, and advanced. And then we also added a no experience option, just as kind of a, not necessarily a cop-out, but there are some people in our department, especially students, who didn't have any experience with any of these levels and didn't feel like it was appropriate for them to say I was at basic when really they had no experience at all. So at the conclusion of the survey, a score is then calculated for each competency area. So for example, they would get, within this programming competency, they would get a score from 0 to 3 based off of kind of the average of where they're at. So, and then these scores were made available to the individual, since it's a self-assessment tool, as well as their supervisor. And we'll talk about what we did with that information in a little bit. So now it's everybody's turn to try it. So you probably have your phone out or it's close by. So we made a abbreviated self-assessment sample here. So you can access it either by the QR code, if you're somebody who uses QR codes, or the shortened link there. And there are 5 questions related to the personal and professional qualities competency. We'll give you a few minutes to complete these. And so with this, just like the example that I showed you previously, there'll be a group of 3 groups of statements after each category, and I want you to select which of those items within those statements relates to your level of experience. So we'll give you a few minutes, and then you'll actually receive a score at the end, which we'll talk about. Okay, so as people are finishing, I just want to kind of show you what we did with some of this information or how you could use this information. So please keep completing the self-assessment, and I promise you will get a score at the end. So what I did probably a month or so ago before the conference, I pushed the same survey out to the listserv. And so what I did is I compiled the scores of people who completed it. And so here on this slide, it's broken down by job category. So if they were a director, associate director, assistant director, coordinator, GSA, and then also undergraduate students. So this just shows the scores of how people who completed it. It was very random, kind of self-reported information. They had about 70 people complete it, but figured it was kind of a good way for you sitting in your seat to, based off of the score you have in your hand, how you compare to the people who took it. So that's kind of how we've then turned this into a self-assessment tool that we've used on our campus as well. So obviously director scored a little bit higher, and then the trend went downwards from there.
We did only have 2 GAs complete the survey, but we thought it was fun that the undergraduate students rated themselves higher than the grad students. We figure they don't know how much they don't know yet, so we appreciate their confidence.
Yep. And because this was meant to be a short snapshot of the competencies, this was only 5 of the 9 kind of statements or subcategories within that professional and personal and professional qualities, so this isn't the only section on the full assessment. And this is just an example of how we've kind of looked at our scores within our department at the University of North Dakota. So we did this assessment tool. The numbers I know are a little small and blurry, and they're not the most important at this point, but I just wanted to showcase what we did. We had our full-time staff take it as well as our kind of student leads, and then did a side-by-side comparison and just kind of helped show where we needed to provide more education within our team for our full-time staff as well as our student employees.
And just so you guys, you can see that the gray bar is our professional staff, and the green bar is our student lead team, and then the orange is kind of the average of the two, so kind of worked out in the middle. What we're doing now is our department's piloting a new performance management plan for the university because we tend to be more competency focused. And so we've used this recently where we've asked people to do a self-reflection and kind of look at how they're doing with their job performance, and then through the lens of the university competencies as well as in response to their completion of their own self-assessment of the NIRSA core competencies, they've been asked to complete, set some goals based on those particular items. So next year, since the full assessment of the competencies is kind of lengthy, it takes a little time to go through and answer all the questions. We may use segments of that also as a 360 type feedback mechanism. So for example, if you score, maybe one of the areas you'd like to improve on is research and evaluation. You might set a goal that says, I'm going to take, a webinar to improve my research and evaluation skills. And then we might have you reassess yourself, or if you worked with other students and worked on them with research and evaluation, perhaps they would evaluate you as well, and then we could actually hopefully see that score go up by virtue of your intensive focus on that through the year. So that's one of the ways we're looking at that. And then of course our team, the supervisor meets with the individual to codify the goal, and then those are things that they'll reflect on and be held accountable for in the performance plan next year when we do the follow-up. But we will be meeting throughout the semester. This is one of the things that UND is hoping that will change in the culture at the institution by encouraging regular meetings throughout the year to touch base on the progress of the goals and how those core competencies and those conversations are progressing throughout the year, rather than just a single once a year conversation about performance. And we're also we took those averages for the teams, and I haven't started it yet, but using those scores to kind of design some team building activities and professional development for us as a whole. So if you look at, for example, on the gray bars, our lowest score as a whole is in facility management, planning, and design. And that's because the facility management pieces, particularly as they're described in the core competency, those responsibilities are largely housed with one or two individuals, and not everybody's exposed to all the different aspects of that particular core competency. And so that's a way that we can, as a team, be intentional about improving how we are serving our students and our own knowledge of what we do to support each other as well as to provide that service. So we're hoping to use this, like I said, to help the teams grow as well, not just the individuals.
All right, thank you. So that's one example of how to use the competencies, or how some of our colleagues are using the competencies. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about how we've put them into action at Mount Royal University up in Calgary, Canada, for those that don't know where that is. And so we spent some time over the last 18 months or so reworking our strategic plan in our department, and it was in parallel with our university strategic planning process and our division strategic planning process. And as we were walking through that process, we really landed in a place where I felt like we needed to reevaluate how we are resourcing our department. So wanted to take a look at all of the different jobs within our department and how we were lining that up, and started to take a look at this competency thing. And I was certainly no expert at all, but I wanted to have a look and see how we could use that aligned with our strategic plan and make sure that we had the right people doing the right things. And I talk about, right people and right seats on the bus. And so I started with trying to figure out who was much smarter than me. And so I leaned on my colleague right beside me here, a NIRSA expert, brought her in as Kathleen had been involved in this competency piece a whole lot, and wanted to start with a blank whiteboard. And it was a really interesting exercise where we looked at all of the things that we said we wanted to do in our strategic plan. We looked at the NIRSA competencies that our industry says we need to be doing, and tried to map those out, and really reworked an entire org chart based on that discussion. And that blank whiteboard was a really interesting one. Then, of course, you get real from there, and you have to go to your HR department and figure out if they're going to be able to let you do what you dreamed up on that blank whiteboard. And so then that was a process that we went through and walked through with HR what we could do and what we couldn't do in terms of changing positions. And in the end, we did a rollout in the summer and into the fall, where ended up actually abolishing 7 of our positions, creating 8 new positions, changing all 24 professional positions in our department, every single job description. Rewrote all those job descriptions with Kathleen, and I'll let her talk about that just a little bit.
Yeah, no, it was obviously really rewarding to see theory to practice, and this framework that we have all evidence suggesting that at any stage that these components from a start and a beginning of a career and within this organization, some coordinator job descriptions, out through an evolving role for a director on a fast-moving campus with changing landscape and leadership and things going on at divisional and institutional layer, and to really see that this framework that's taken a long time to put together in any one of those slices had real relevance, and to start to build blocks that really intersected. I think so often we can find, unfortunately, reinforcing the silos of the programming side of the house, the marketing and communications team, and so wherever in any of this work, it was where are the horizontal threads to get back at where you want to be spending your time and the expertise of the talent of the team you have available at any given window. And so anyway, it was very, very rewarding to sort of have that opportunity to in some ways blow apart previous thinking of best practice, but use it in today's vernacular and in the landscape that we all want to move in a direction that we do what we say we're going to do. And Chris obviously took the lead to this whole effort.
And these next couple of slides, and then we'll just slide back to a couple of points on the other one, but this is just an example. And I'm not sure if you can read that at the back. It might be a little bit small, but again, you'll get the PowerPoint to be able to look at later. But this was a couple of bullet points from one of the position descriptions. And one of the new positions we created is an experiential learning coordinator position. That was part of what we dreamt up on that whiteboard. And loving the building of that position with these new competencies. And you can see some of the language from if you're familiar with the competency language, that we embedded them right into the position descriptions. And again, this was one of those challenges we had with our HR department, because our HR department, none of them are in the room, right? Not very progressive when it comes to looking at things from a competency model. And so we were really pushing that envelope for them, and they had no idea how to do the evaluation of these position descriptions written with the competency model. So I had to work through that with a lot of care, a lot of convincing of what we really meant by this. What do we want people to do on a daily basis? And it was an interesting process there as well. So this is some of the responsibilities that you would list, and list them using some of the language. And these are some of the preferred qualifications on that position description. Again, using some of the language of those competencies. And so this was built right out into all 24 of the position descriptions. And so then if you just step back here to, I talked about rollout, and then the red pen. One of the things I did when I talked to our staff as we rolled this out was say, I want you to have your new position description on your desk at all times with a red pen beside it. Some people didn't like red, they went green, whatever. But they had a pen beside it, and this exercise is a year-long exercise for us because we're learning, right? We're trying this newly, some of it not familiar to people, And we're having those conversations throughout the year about what we meant by that. Met with each staff member, walked through their position description initially, but it's an ongoing conversation throughout the year, and we probably missed some stuff. And in fact, I know we've missed some stuff along the way. As good as Kathleen is, there's a couple of things we didn't quite get nailed down yet, and there's some red pen stuff. So now this summer coming up, as we start to have annual performance appraisal, although I hate that language, and we're going to change that too, but we're doing the performance management using perhaps a system like they've done at North Dakota with the Qualtrics, or perhaps using a product that Kathleen can talk to you much more about, putting that in place so that we can measure performance against these new position descriptions, therefore measuring performance against the competencies, and then taking that learning, modifying, putting them back through HR, and continuing the process. So we've got a few other examples, and I'll pass that one to Jackie.
Okay. We just wanted to share from across the country different things that are going on. So I reached out to some colleagues and was connected with new and different colleagues and wanted to share that because you know how NIRSA works. We all know different people, and as we spend more time in the NIRSA, that web gets woven thicker and thicker. But met some new folks through the process and talked to Wes at Ohio University, and they're earlier in the process than Mount Royal. But a couple of points that Wes pointed out is, first, it was someone on their staff getting to really know the NIRSA resource. And if you haven't looked at the NIRSA resource at first, it can look a little bit overwhelming. Each of the 8 competencies has 80 to 100 examples split among the basic, intermediate, and advanced. So it's a fair amount of material. And then there's also the self-assessment tool that pulls all of those examples into the rating document. The beauty of this is you can pick and choose what parts of it you want to use and modify to suit your needs. So we want to make sure that you understand it's not something that you have to take as is, but you can draw on it for all of these different things. So once a person on your campus spends a little time looking through this to kind of understand it, you can start making some connections then. And at Ohio University, they were making the connections between the departmental and divisional imperatives. They use pillars at their institution, and then they're looking through different areas, how they're going to use it with their professional staff. They're still just figuring out exactly how they want to do that, which of the competencies are essential to success in different positions. And as we each know, a similar job position at one institution to another institution might have a different set of responsibilities. And so not all of the same competencies are going to apply to the same position. So you can pick and choose. And then what I'm also finding is at Ohio University, they're just starting to touch on the graduate assistantship and use there. So I have a couple of different examples I'm going to go on to next across the country where others are using the competencies in some academic areas. So this particular one, James Madison, Julie Wallace-Carr was definitely on the team that developed all of this stuff, and so she was extremely familiar. How could you get more familiar after spending 2 or 3 years working on this stuff? But she immediately applied it into the academic realm. She has a dual appointment in both academic and in campus recreation, but they are tailoring their graduate assistantships to meet the needs not only of the individual and aligning it with the department, but then they can also use this in the academic coursework with the graduate assistants in both self-assessment and development of the student to make sure that that experience is very specific to preparing that individual for the workplace, our workplace. Another one, I don't know how many of you might know Jill Sturtz. She completed her PhD about 1.5 years ago, and she was working on a competency dissertation that paralleled the development of the NIRSA competencies. So we had a couple of conversations along the way, and she has been using the competencies as they have emerged in her work. And interestingly, she and Wes are connected, so that was one reason why Ohio was in on the early part of the wave. And so she actually teaches undergraduate coursework. She has a faculty appointment and is using it specifically in this undergraduate class, and cross-checked the course materials with the competencies, and nearly half of that one particular academic course in administration of campus recreation is built around the competencies. So one more, many of you know Kara if you went to the opening session. Kara is the program chair this year, and she is also a faculty member at Elon University, where she also went to undergraduate, I believe. And she has also taught in the school. And so if you look in a couple of areas, you'll see how the annual conference, the school, and many of NIRSA's other educational offerings note which competency the sessions covered. That only started in 2013, and so that is a new way that the competencies are embedded into the educational offerings, both at the professional development, NIRSA educational offerings level, but then also woven into the academic preparation. So in Kara's facilities class, they use the specific facility competencies. In her research methods course, uses that different set of competencies for that group. And then also, this was very interesting to me, what she said is it helped demonstrate to the students how the faculty were engaged in not only the theory, but also the practice. So that was a really valuable tidbit of information. And that last bullet, using it as an indicator of professional standards. The University of Dayton, and I want to give a little shout out, Mark Hoying has a presentation on Wednesday at 9:15, and what his session will be doing is going into depth about graduate assistantship experience, and more specifically how the competencies are used with, at a deeper level than what we're sharing. We're giving more of a survey type of it, and he's going much more in depth. So just a couple of bullet points about how they're using it. Similar to what I mentioned about James Madison, really tailoring that experience for the graduate assistants, and looking at what they're doing in year one and year two, not only how it's serving the department, but also how it's serving that individual, so that they can map the experience and really maximize the students' preparation from the academic to the work world. So pretty cool stuff. Just a sprinkling of some other examples, and I already mentioned that first one, but another project that's going on right now, Mo is currently chairing the executive education task force, trying to develop a little bit further on what NIRSA offers in those areas. And there's a survey that's gone out to directors, and when they were developing that survey to gather information, they started with the competencies, and then they picked and chose from among that resource, why reinvent the wheel, and threw in a few other things so that they could get to where they wanted to get to gather the information. So this is something that's in process right now. There I used to be, my pronunciation. So this resource, as we mentioned earlier, you can modify it. So it's not something that should be intimidating. It's something we really want people to embrace, because Jen Spear, one of the folks who was also on that team that developed them, said, gosh, I wish when we were coming up we had a resource like this. So I'm hoping that all of you will find that as well as you get into it.
I've got one other thing before we open it up to some questions, and I just want to share that I've been serving with a group on the leadership task force for NIRSA. And clearly one of the question marks, and it's certainly relevant because there's very similar conversations of how can an individual early in NIRSA find meaningful ways to get involved and then ultimately lead and use their talent. The same sort of pathway when you think about on a campus, how can someone start to get their functional sets of skills, build their portfolio of certifications, CEUs, really feel comfortable in that one, role, but then see themselves trying to go to that next spot. And whether it's an assistant director or a manager, it really doesn't matter what the language is. But as it narrows, It is hard and competitive, and the pathway's not always clear. So as I've been talking to some folks the last couple of days, it's clear that these dialogues, whether it's about NIRSA in general or you on your campus, particularly at those moments that aren't easy to navigate how to clear the hurdle. You know, whether, even for some, if you are not currently working in a department or in an area, or you might be a solo agent on a campus, you can start to think about mapping how you might clear that hurdle, how you might vie for a promotion or a job relative to outside of your functional skills and the breadth of these competencies in this fabric, you know, kind of rethink, and then have evidence of those over time, is certainly with the registry and with other opportunities too. So anyway, we could keep giving you more, but we really wanted to make sure we have good time with you and either hear some ideas that we have not heard about and any questions as well. And this is NIRSA, and we ask questions. It's part of our culture.
So judging from the silence, you guys are all going to go out and start using these?
We'll also be available afterward if you're not comfortable in this type of setting, shouting it out across the big room. We're just, I know since we have presented in this fashion with us up on this panel, so it's ever so slightly awkward for us, but I'm not sure that we have conveyed kind of some of the excitement behind this on how useful this will be. You probably think I'm nerdy, but that's okay. It's really something that's going to be so helpful and so useful, and we really want to reassure you that even though at first it looks like a long document, that the usefulness of it is once you get past that first blush thing, it's like, oh yeah, this is pretty easy. How many of you have ever heard of Bloom's taxonomy? A lot of educators are okay, great, about half the room. And some of the progression is built on those levels of learning as we go through from the basic to the intermediate to the advanced.
Right here.
Hi. There, a long time ago, well, I shouldn't say a long time ago, I have a spiral-bound book, and it's an assessment specialty tool.
Yeah.
And I looked at the date because we're working on major assessment projects at Strasbourg, and the date of that tool is from 1997. Is there something that will be coming out similar to that, or is this more of a digital sort of example of that?
So this is all digital. I mean, it's PDF and it's Excel. Qualtrics, what Karina had developed. I know what you're talking about. It's a small size.
It's a normal 8.5 by 11.
Okay, maybe I'm not familiar with the same thing, but it had a lot of terminology for evaluations and so forth.
It did, but it had job descriptions, and then it also had assessment tools in the book that you could use to assess your individual programs and then the employees that work in those programs. It's still pretty transferable. You can still use it, but I didn't know if they were in the process of updating it. It's a NIRSA document that was available. I bought it a long time ago at this conference, so I
Okay.
didn't know if they were updating that or just shifting it to a digital version.
We can certainly check with the national headquarters. I might guess that this is the new updated. If you recall the timeline, if that was something from the 90s, the competency, this whole timeline started in 2004 with the Barcelona study, and my guess is that that is a little bit, what you have is somewhat outdated, and I don't know off the top of my head if anyone has plans to refresh that.
Right over here.
I watched a TED Talk about MIT has learning experiences where they've taken like lectures and taken them out of the classroom, and they broke them out into modules, so unbundling the learning experience. And so they would do like one lab could be done online, and then you can do that experience virtually. So I was wondering if we could apply that to this kind of learning that you'd like professionals to have. So if we break out, I think your competency based on the level of learning. And then once you reach the programming competency level advanced, then you're awarded the programming something. And then if you earn all the competencies, then you are so-and-so certified. And kind of like the rec sports management school, but having a certification or something that you're earning all these competencies, but you're doing it in your own home or something like that.
I was going to relate to the registry. So I understand your question. If you look at the competencies, though, across these 8 areas, there is no expectation that an individual would reach the high level at all 8. So it depends on your... If you wanted to, you could work toward that. You could. And it's somewhat subjective on, you know, if I rate you at this and you rate yourself, then where's the disparity? It opens conversation. It's not necessarily something that's black and white that says yes or no. Some of it's contextual. So I think Jen had some comments registry-wise.
Yeah, well, and and the core competencies came out of NIRSA wanting to have a way to designate or credential professionals and reward them for a commitment to lifelong learning and intentional professional development, and for contributing to the institute, the profession, and wanting the profession to advance. And so through the proposal of the registry, that's kind of where the core we needed, an earlier slide, we didn't really go through it, talked about the principles of what makes a profession. How do we know we're truly a profession? And some of that was, that you're practice, not just theory, and that you have organization and structure and ethics. And then the last 2 bullet points, one of them was a specialized body of knowledge, and the other was a credentialing system. And this is exactly the specialized body of knowledge that we're hoping to embrace and really weave through the culture of NIRSA. And then that last piece, the credential, that's what the registry is for. And I presented earlier this morning kind of talking about what's in the registry, why should people get involved. And it's really about demonstrating that commitment that we are in this for the long haul, and we're trying to advance this profession and stay current with all the changing landscapes in higher education and learning and all the, there's just so much going on. And one of the challenges is helping the registry become a really valuable tool for the membership. So we're looking for those kind of suggestions, and I think you'll see some digital badging, some micro-credentialing things coming out as ways to recognize people. In order to maintain your registry status, you have to have continuing education and/or professional involvement credits. And so we're looking at things like the micro-credentialing to facilitate those processes. And so some of your suggestions are a great way to tie into both. And we're open to suggestions as far as how that goes and how NIRSA can develop tools for everybody to be using the core competencies in advancing the profession.
And using to teach GAs.
Absolutely.
In small pieces.
Another caveat is that in that self-assessment tool, there are 2 ratings, one for mastery and one for relevance. So you could be in a position where a certain competency area is not really relevant to your position. So I think that's important to recognize that sometimes you can't do it all, even though we all think we can every day.
Well, I think too, Chris gave an example of a quick move, relatively quick, right? In higher ed, nothing really moves that quick, but to do in one sweep. But when you think about the natural turnover that takes place in a department in any given window of 18 months or 3, any increment, that you can rework yourself to map a whole area in ways that, a little different job description or a little different emphasis on a hire for this broader window. And certainly there's been, some really significant change in landscape when we think about technology and we think about some things that we didn't imagine 10 years ago. This is yet another way, and both hopefully as much individually for a single professional, as well as a collective effort of impact on a campus, and ensuring that if there's identified gaps, that you then map, your next strategic hires to fill those, and really see some longevity to the opportunities as well. I don't know if you want to speak to the pace and pros and cons that you looked at, whether it should all be one and done or over time?
Well, and I think, I mean, our process was, and I know you're all laughing at how I say process, by the way. I know these guys were anyways. So it really, it worked for us in that particular set of circumstances where we're implementing a new strategic plan and we really needed to align resources to a new strategic plan. But that now it has us start thinking about what are those next steps. So with our professional staff using some kind of a tool like Qualtrics or like Sport Upside that Kathleen is working with, some kind of a technology tool that allows us to now, if it's a scoring kind of idea, but that almost sounds too crass, but it's an opportunity to map out what the curriculum looks like. Where are people at, and what's the next step? And can we actually build curriculum for people progressing through wherever they are at, whether it be right from the undergraduates on up? We're really looking forward to that opportunity to build that out. Now that's going to take time, that next step.
And going back to your question about the booklet, this resource was intentionally created to be electronically, tying in with the registry. One of the charges of the Registry Commission is to annually evaluate the competencies, and then within that would be to evaluate these examples. One big discussion that we had over this time period was, is the equity, diversity, and inclusion piece, is that a standalone competency or is it embedded into the other things that we do? And so some of those questions will continue to come up, not only about equity, diversity, and inclusion, but other things as time goes by. And with this rapidly changing world we now live in, it was intentionally chosen to be electronic so it would be much easier to update and be dynamic and nimble as we responded to our changing environment.
Was there apprehension from your staff changing the job descriptions when they were already working for you?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, there was some emotion involved. It was a significant change, and so we went through a whole change management process there, where working with HR, and Kathleen helped advise some of the things that we needed to do well through that. But it really, there was a hurdle to jump over. We had to cross that barrier. But once we got to the other side of it, now it just becomes about communicating about what we're trying to do over and over, and communicating and answering the questions. And the red pen exercise that I talked about. Let's work through this together. What do we really mean by this? And we're learning together. I by no means trying to set myself as the expert and I'm telling people exactly what they need. It's a conversation. So that's helping. But change management, it's going to be 18, 24 months before we really feel comfortable in the new structure. Are there some other examples out there that how you are using the competencies on your campus? Some things that we haven't touched on yet that we might be able to share and learn from each other.
Or things that you might even think of as a result of this back on your radar screen. Have some of you made some notes of in the next 6 months?
I think I'm from Ohio University, and I think one of the things that, in terms of mapping out positions and laying out the competencies for individuals, one of the things we're intentionally trying to do, though, is tie it to our strategic plan and create experiences for staff to get actual experience. So it might not be tied specifically to their job, but it's a departmental initiative or departmental goal
No, that's fantastic. Thank you. I mean, I was just thinking about how many times I worked with staff at particularly, maybe in the first 5 years. And, either wanting to just do what was comfortable because they liked it and it fed their passion. And I was having a great conversation with Paul Wesselman, and he's got some great material in both of his sessions tomorrow, so maybe it's a plug for Paul. But it was trying to find that balance of, because if you know that one area of weakness is research and assessment, but it really just doesn't float your boat, then you're probably not going to spend much time there. If you're in charge of a whole area and can resource that and know just enough, maybe you're doing right still by your department. But you've got to see where you can, I think, nudge those that you work with in a peer way, but certainly as a supervisor and someone mentoring or developing others to say, no, if you don't start to look at these really seriously, you're going to be in that aquatics box forever, no matter what you want to do. And whether at some point, if you want to be that assistant over a few things or an associate over many, then now's the time, right? And really be serious about plotting out quite strategically and intentionally. And again, if you're here and you don't have that from above, what we're trying to encourage you and talk to any of us is you can do it by yourself. I hope you don't have to, but you can. And if you're an influencer and someone who can reshape for others, there's now tools for you to do it too. So it really can apply to that range. That's why I was pleased to see the range sitting here, frankly. It's terrific. So other quick few things, then we'll stay as your resource up here. Well, listen, terrific. Thank you very much for coming and thinking about this framework, and encourage you for the rest of the sessions that you go to be serious, at least for your own footnotes of, are you all in one category, because that's your comfortable spot, or are you, in fact, sort of mapping a little range for yourself? So thank you again, and look forward to good interactions with many of you.
Again, thank you all for coming. Don't forget to give feedback through the guidebook app.
Awesome. Thank you.
Anyone selling tickets?
Yeah.
We're going to do a shameless plug.
That's great.
I'm going to go down there.
Also, if you're still listening, I have tickets if you want to enter a raffle for the quilt.